Chapter 4 The Provisioners. The next morning I woke in the narrow, brick-walled room I had been led to the night before, light streaming through the tall, thin window that obscured my view of the central courtyard surrounding the judicial building, but it also afforded me some small privacy. I sat up and hugged the woolen bed cover around me to protect from the chill. My untouched supper from the night before still rested on the narrow wooden table beside the cot. A dark stew with potatoes and peppers, rolls with salted butter in a small dish, and weak ale. I was thirsty and drained the ale, and despite it having lost its froth, it was remarkably refreshing. I was contemplating whether to butter the rolls or to try and empty my bladder in what I assumed was the chamber pot, judging from the smell of it, when I was startled by a loud pounding on the iron-banded door and Elda's voice.
"Rise up, bookworm! Time to meet your day!"
She then pushed the door open without waiting for a response. She had the canvas backpacks I had seen yesterday, one in each hand, and threw one at the cot. The weight of it almost pushed me off the bedding.
"You're not even dressed. Get that gear on and meet me in the commons. I'm not missing breakfast."
And just as suddenly, she turned and left. My gray robe and soft leather shoes had been taken from me the day before, once we arrived at the judiciary buildings. I hurried to put on the clothes I had been issued, boots and trousers in a heap beside the cot. I struggled to lace the boots, and in the end wrapped the laces around each leg several times, and grabbed both the backpack and hemp sack with the other items I had been given, and left the room. We had separated yesterday, with Elda and her Sepio companions entering the main brick building, while I was led around the side to a set of stairs, descending to a basement. A door and a hallway and another door brought us to a room with a long counter, behind which a bored-looking man in brown robes looked up at our entrance. "Traveling or fighting?" he asked. "Traveling," said Nico. "Cross country." The man nodded and looked at me. "Off with those robes and shoes." It took me a moment to realize that I was expected to disrobe, here, with all three men watching me. I then noticed a bench to the side of the room with cloak hooks above it. I moved to the bench, first putting down the black object I had been holding since Curator Silas had passed it to me, then lifted my robes over my head and hung them on a hook. I sat on the bench to remove my shoes, momentarily startled as the cold wood touched my rear. The brown-robed man had come around the counter, holding a long, thin cord. "Stand up and hold out your arms." He began to stretch out the cord against me and mutter to himself. Nico was watching me with apparent, unabashed interest which made me uncomfortable, but the other Sepio had turned away. "Turn around." I turned away from seeing Nico's gaze staring at the brick wall while the cord touched my back, my legs. "All right, I have tunics and trousers and undergarments. You'll have to start wearing those or you'll get rashes and blisters. No cloaks or mantles, but it's spring, and better not to have to carry them if you don't have to. I may also have a decent set of calf boots that could fit you well enough if you double up on the socks. You'll need a belt as well and a good waxed canvas hat and poncho to keep the rain off. Gloves?" I must have looked blank. "Yes, gloves then. Better to have them than not. Where are you off to then, Gray?" "Nothing," said Nico. The man in brown looked mildly impressed. "Bit of a journey then. Off to sort out the books, eh? Never been, me." He went behind the counter again and disappeared behind a wall. I stood naked for much too long, looking anywhere but at Nico. "Here we are." A large hempen bag was dropped on the counter, and a set of brown boots with long leather laces. "Give those a try. Unders first, then trousers and tunic. Here." I was handed thin linen shorts that clung to my hips when I put them on, then thick woolen socks. "Trousers next. One leg and then the other. Oh, you'd best sit down." I had never worn anything but robes and was having obvious difficulty. "Good. Tunic next, that's right. Then the belt goes around your waist. See those holes? You should find loops on the trousers that will poke through, and the belt will keep your trousers up and your tunic down. Pull the belt through the clasp like this." He had come around the counter to assist. "You can tighten the neck up with the drawstring or leave it loose. Now the boots. Can you tie knots? No? I'll show you here." He showed me how to lace the boots and tie them several times, and then had me walk across the room and back and pinch the toes. "Good. Better than I'd hoped. Comfortable?" I nodded, uncertain. "Delightful. Now you've got a spare tunic here and spare socks and unders. The poncho will fit anyone, and the hat folds for storage. You can find cloaks in berth once you leave Citadel. I'd recommend something fur-lined with pockets." "So," said the man in brown, whose name I never learned, "I suppose that's that, then. You can leave the robes and shoes. My boy will return them to archives presently, but don't forget your... What is that, anyway?" "It's a repeater," I said automatically, not knowing what I was saying until the words had left my lips, and none the wiser for having said it. I slipped the black glass oval into my backpack. I was led to the room I awoke in shortly after, where my uneaten dinner was waiting, and I was surprised that Nico and the other Sepio turned to leave without locking me in. I said as much.
"And where would you run off to?" said Nico, half laughing. "You don't want Jan or I, or the Nine Forbid Elda, to have to hunt you down now, would you? Better to be civil about the whole thing. It's a done deal."
With that, Nico and Jan turned away, and I closed the door and cried until I fell, exhausted, to sleep. I had passed by the common room upon entering the judiciary, and found it again easily enough, as the hallway I was in led directly to it. A massive, loud, circular room. There were 2 rows of terraces that wrapped the interior and seemed to imitate the concourse in Citadel, and above, a domed and glassed roof with louvered panes. The main area was divided into quadrants, with paths both bisecting and encircling, and a large raised platform at the center. One quadrant had wood tables and chairs, and was evidently intended as a dining area, with a rectangular basin at the outer edge filled with chipped ice and 2 tapped kegs, and against the far wall a long opening and counter behind which sweated cooks in stained yellow linens. The smells of cooking became stronger as I approached, searching for Elda, and I found her at a long table with 4 others.
"Well, look at you, Cully. All outfitted for the road, I see,"
said Elda, and some others at her table looked to me, a few with slight smiles.
"Drop your gear and get fed while the trough is still full, and bring me back some more of the sausages."
She nodded to the kitchen. I left my backpack and hemp sack at the table, and walked to the counter. There was a line of people at one side, and I got behind a black-cloaked man at the rear, waiting my turn to obtain a wood tray from a stack. I returned with 2 plates on a tray, one with mumbled eggs with herbs and toasted buttered bread, the other with a half-dozen sausage links. 2 of Elda's companions had departed, leaving 2 older women at the table, one dressed in medico blue, the other armored similarly to Elda, but with a metallic sheen to the paint. I passed the plate of sausages to Elda as I sat down, but she did not acknowledge me or the plate.
"It needs doing. I know what's at stake,"
said Elda quietly.
"To be clear, the wound needs time to mend. The skin will tear otherwise," said the woman in blue. "She knows, Nellie," said the woman in red armors, standing up, "and when the time comes, she will do what's necessary."
She glanced at me briefly with a look I could not identify, moving around the table as Elda stood, and the 2 embraced. The woman in blue rose as well.
"May the road rise to meet you."
She placed a hand on Elda's shoulder briefly, and the 2 women left together, leaving Elda and myself. Elda stood for a moment, watching them leave, and then sat again. She absent-mindedly grabbed a sausage and bit into it, chewing slowly, her eyes far away from the common room. Not knowing what to say, I pulled a fork from the clay bowl on the table and began eating. Before leaving, Elda looked me over and helped me to tie my boots properly, and instructed me on the most efficient way to add my spare clothes to the backpack. She seemed muted, distant, but was efficient in her instructions, and I understood that this was not the first time she had escorted a guildsman from Citadel. We shouldered our packs and left the Judiciary building. This time there was no ox-driven cart out front to carry us, and she directed me to start walking the path towards the southern gate. We walked in silence for close to an hour, as I imagined what lay beyond Citadel in the coming days, and fearing Elda's mockery of my ignorance, I kept my thoughts to myself. The ancient cobblestones were worn almost smooth, and I began noticing the off-color ones that had been replaced or repaired as we went. The path was straight and cut a long furrow into the forest around us, with sunlight glancing through the pines and maples and the other trees for which I had no names. Occasionally a robed or armored guildsman would pass by, and once an ox-led wagon much like the one we rode in the day before rattled past, laden with crates and barrels. The citadel's black walls rose higher as we approached, and eventually I could see the inner iris gate and the surrounding buildings. This section of the citadel was partially buried in the earth. The gate was level with the plaza, and the iris was open. We proceeded inside, the terraces above us sweeping away on both sides, and moved around the sprawling, open central meeting area with its leather-bound chairs and benches and tables. I noted its similarity to the communal area in the judiciary, and the terraces curved back in again as we passed the center of the concourse and through the other side of the citadel. As we approached the opposite iris gate that led to the outside world, Elda moved to the right side and down a large, lamp-lit hallway. She entered through a set of open double doors, attended by two red-armored men, one with an iron-banded mace hung from a hook on his belt, and the other with his hand on the butt of his sheathed sword. I followed. Inside was a large room bisected by a long counter divided by wooden panels, and behind which stood 5 or 6 people in brown robes. It was difficult to tell how many, because they would often disappear into another room, and reappear to speak again to those waiting on the opposite side of the counter. There were more armored men and women in red in this room as well, some behind the counter and all armed. A line of guildsfolk wound back and forth, waiting their turn, guided by a system of poles on platforms, with ropes strung between them. We took our position at the end of the line. I used this opportunity to remove my backpack and massage my shoulders, and allow the sweat on my back to cool. Elda seemed unfazed and still distant, and did not remove her pack, standing patiently and moving forward when the line moved. I surreptitiously looked at her now that we were idle. She wore many separate pieces of dark red and weathered leather armors, most notably the wide shoulder and arm pieces set with brass rivets, and leather bracers on the forearms held in place by a series of leather straps. Over the shoulders rested a leather mantle that came just under her breasts, and under that a long-sleeved quilted tunic that came to mid-thigh. She also wore padded and leather-reinforced trousers with calf boots that resembled my own. The leather pieces had fine detailing, etched and stitched into it, curls and long swirling lines that resembled vines. She had a strong jaw and dark eyes, and an oddly delicate nose that seemed out of place. Her hair was dark and cropped short, and she was taller than I, and I consider myself to be of average height for a man. Muscular I have already commented on, but she stood much like men often do, solidly with legs firmly planted and apart. She was hard edges and immovable, and yet people were drawn to her. That last was difficult to write. I miss her, and wish she were here to mock me, or call me bookworm, or cully, or punch me in the arm, making the words I write smeared and blurry, or hear her loud, braying laughter one more time. Eventually we took our place at the front of the line, and were motioned forward by a woman in brown. We approached the counter, and Elda said,
Elda of Corpus Rubrum, Agonist, and Ren, formerly of Corpus Candesco, word right. Full withdrawal on both accounts.
The woman looked at us both and nodded. Please place the first finger of your right hand in the receptacle. Elda went first without incident, and I followed suit, experiencing a slight but not overly unpleasant pinch at the end of my finger. I withdrew my finger from the polished silver hole, but found no injury on inspecting it. Our assistant then produced 2 small pieces of parchment from below the counter and left to go into the next room.
There's always biting bugs in those. Hope you didn't get bit,
said Elda in a whisper. I frowned and looked in the hole, not able to see the end. She grasped my shoulder suddenly, and I yelped in surprise, and she let out a laugh loud enough for others to glance over.
Oh, Cully, we're going to have some fun, you and me,
she said, not reassuringly, and slapped me hard on the back. Her time of quiet introspection had passed. The attendant returned with another robed man, clothed in metallic brown, carrying 2 jingling leather bags. He smiled and said to Elda, "I'll need to see the documents, please." She shrugged and unslung her backpack, untied the top, and pulled out my contract along with some other papers. He examined them, shuffling the parchments a bit more than necessary, and then returned them to Elda. "Very good, then. Both accounts liquidated as requested. This is yours, and this is the remainder for Sir Wren." She passed me my contract.
You might as well carry this with you. It's your burden to bear, but
and she gave me a wink.
I will carry the ori.
And she dumped both leather sacks in her backpack. There was one final stop before we passed through the main citadel gate, never to return, and that was across the concourse and down another hallway, to another set of open double doors guarded by 2 more armored individuals in red. This time, however, the one on the left said,
Elda, will this be the last time mine eyes shall... Ugh!
And she planted her knee firmly in his groin. The other guard looked alarmed and grabbed the hilt of his sword, but she looked at him and said quietly,
You don't want to do that, Rickard. This is between Jurg and me.
And she leaned towards the gasping man's head and whispered. He nodded, eyes squinted. Rickard did not draw his sword, but watched the scene as I did. And just as suddenly she walked inside the room, leaving me to follow bewildered. We had entered the armory, and there was likely more than one in Citadel, more than 2, but I never thought to ask Elda. Another long counter like the previous room, but no line of waiting guildsfolk. Behind the counter were 2 men in red robes and several more in brown. Behind the men were racks and shelves with swords and sharp things on poles and bows with quivered arrows and all manner of lethal implements artfully arrayed. There was a smell of oils and metal that could be tasted, and the muted sounds of steel on stone from behind the rear wall. One of the men in red, an older man with a scar running through his graying beard, gave Elda a slight smile and bent under the counter. He rose with several items wrapped in oilcloth, and she lifted them out. The first was a massive broad axe, with a flared steel blade on one side and a thick curved pick on the other like a tusk, seated on a long-bowed wood shaft, wrapped in braided leather and banded in iron, with the end tipped in steel. She tested the edge of the blade with her finger, wiped the edge with the oilcloth, and then capped the blade end with a wool-lined waxed leather coverlet. She seated the axe between her back and her pack, and I noted that it rested naturally with the axe head behind her own and the steel end of the haft protruding from under the pack. Next was a long knife or short sword that she later called a machete, curved or bent halfway down the blade and wider towards the tip. This and a simple double-edged dagger were sheathed to a belt that she wrapped around her middle and fastened. Last, a small folding knife that she added to her left boot. I wondered how comfortable walking with that inside would be.
He's going to need something useful as well,
she said, nodding to me.
Nothing dramatic.
I've got just the thing,
said the man with the knowing smile, and moved down the left rack to unhook something. He returned with an odd-looking hatchet, made of black metal as long as my arm, with a small axe head on one side, a flat iron surface on the opposite, and 2 flat prongs that curved upwards from the head. Braided leather strips made the grip, and it appeared to have seen some ungentle prior use. He covered the head in a worn leather pouch with drawstrings.
Hatchet, hammer, pry bar. It'll still kill a man if needed, but much more useful than that bloody great chunk of metal she favors.
Ah, it's the look of the things, as you rightly know, Brant. Useful for making ale-brave churls think twice and chopping logs. These, on the other hand,
and she tapped the grips of the two blades on her belt.
are the real business.
They shared a short, grim laugh. She turned to me and looked at either side of my hips.
Take off your belt.
After a pause, I unslung my backpack and did as she asked, passing it to her outstretched hand. She laid it on the counter and drew her dagger and proceeded to cut into the leather, making 2 parallel slits.
You know you've got tools for that, Elda, said Brant, but a bit late now. At least you didn't cut into the counter.
She gave him a look and passed me the belt, and I put it back on.
Now turn to me.
And she took the hatchet and pulled my belt, so that the hatchet's handle could slide between the 2 slits in the leather. The hatchet's head now rested on my right hip.
The leather will keep tearing if you don't reinforce those cuts with some stitching.
He addressed me directly.
Take it off again, to Elda. Give me 5 minutes, or you'll be buying another belt in a week's time.
Fine,
she sighed. I took the belt off again and put it on the counter while Brant rummaged again under the counter. He brought up a box containing a cruel-looking curved needle, a pointed punch, and thick waxed thread, and using my new hatchet as a hammer for the punch, began stitching. He was fast and efficient, and I was handed my belt back. As I was putting my belt on and hoisting my pack again, there was an awkward moment between Brant and Elda, where she did not look at him, but his gaze did not leave her. She saw that I was ready. She looked at Brant and seemed ready to say something. He nodded faintly to her. She closed her mouth, nodded, and quickly turned to the doors.
let's go.